The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill But Came Down a Mountain is a quirky movie starring Hugh Grant. The name comes from a true story about a Welsh town that was angered to discover that their mountain was only 930 feet tall, 70 feet short of the requisite 1,000. The people of the town persuaded the surveyors to remeasure, but still came in 16 feet short. The people then went about building it up the extra 16 feet to get mountain status. In the process, they enlisted and converted Grant, who was one of the surveyors, into a believer in their purpose. The real change was in his character, in his heart, rather than the mountain. Today in 1 Samuel chapters 9 and 10, we're going to learn about another man who went up a hill and came down a changed man. When we first read about him, his dad was described as a man of valor, and he is described as a handsome man who was taller than everyone around him. Chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Yes, we're talking about Saul, who became the first king of Israel. He was still a young man when his father sent him out looking for a herd of donkeys. After 3 days of fruitless searching, they ended up near the home of Samuel, and, knowing he was a prophet of God, decided to seek his advice. Chapter 9, verses 6 through 8. The text states Saul and his servant went up the hill to the city looking for the prophet, verses 10 through 14. There they met Samuel, who had been told in advance by God that the future king of Israel was coming, verses 15 and 16, and then was told, "Here he is," verse 17. Samuel immediately took Saul aside and, despite his modest protests of insignificance, made him the guest of honor for the sacrifice and the celebratory meal, verses 19 through 24. After the meal was over, Samuel took Saul onto the roof of his house to talk privately, presumably about his call to become king, except the text just does not say, verse 25. The next morning, just before he left, Samuel pulled Saul aside, anointed him with oil, and declared him king, 1 Samuel 10, verse 1. Saul's life would never be the same. He went up the mountain just an ordinary man, but came down a king. So what's the lesson for us on today's Sensual Service Saturday version of Morning Minutes in the Bible? Just like there was a formal requirement for the hill to be considered a mountain in the movie, there was a formal requirement for Saul to become king of Israel, the selection by God and anointing found in chapter 10, verse 1. In a similar way, there is a formal requirement to become a Christian: circumcision of the heart and immersion in water for the remission of sins, Colossians 2, verses 11 and 12. Today's world, choosing more feeling-oriented responses, rejects that as a senseless ritual. But why not simply obey the Lord? Cut out the defiant heart of disobedience and submit to the sensual experience of water immersion. Circumcision of the heart and baptism is a character-changing event. But to say no is to stay the same and lose out on God's greatest gift. And what's the sense in that? Well, thanks for watching Morning Minutes in the Bible on Sensual Service Saturday. Until tomorrow, this is James McClenny hoping you have a great day.